Okay, I'm still reading on page 342 in Truth in Lending Act. I'm in a section titled General Rules for Final Disclosures on Mortgage Loans, and this is out of the Code of Federal Regulations 1026.19, as quoted by the Reference Guide to Regulatory Compliance. The general rules for final disclosures on mortgage loans must reflect the actual terms of the transaction and be provided no later than 3 days before consummation for transactions secured by a timeshare. The disclosure must be provided no later than consummation. Any disclosure not provided to the consumer in person will be considered to be received by the consumer 3 days after they're delivered or placed in the mail. The waiver for a bona fide personal financial emergency can modify or waive the 7-day waiting period after receiving the early disclosures. To effect the waiver, this must be given to the creditor in writing. It can't be on a pre-printed form. The waiver must be signed by all consumers who are primarily liable on the obligation. Settlement agents may provide the final disclosure to the consumer, but the creditor is responsible for ensuring compliance. Changes to the disclosure before consummation. If the disclosures become inaccurate before consummation, the creditor must provide corrected disclosures so the consumer receives them at or before consummation. However, the creditor must permit the consumer to inspect the disclosures at least one business day immediately preceding the consummation and may only omit items relating to the seller. If any of the following become inaccurate, new disclosures and a new waiting period are required. That's the APR, the loan product is changed, or the prepayment penalty is added, causing the information to become inaccurate. If the event occurs during 30 days following consummation to make the final disclosures inaccurate, the inaccuracy results in a change to the amount actually paid by the consumer. The creditor must provide a corrected disclosure no later than 30 days after receiving the information establishing the inaccuracy. If a change is due to a clerical error on a non-numeric disclosure, the creditor must provide corrected disclosures no later than 30 days after consummation. Refunds. If amounts paid by the consumer exceed the amounts disclosed in the estimated disclosures in the amount greater than the allowed tolerance, the creditor must refund the excess and provide a corrected disclosure that reflects the refund no later than 60 days after consummation. Charges disclosed on the good faith estimate and refunds and changes to the disclosure before consummation and the waiver all consist of are all general rules for final disclosures. Moving forward, there's more here. There's an average charge again, and the amount imposed upon the consumer may not exceed the amount actually received by the settlement provider for the service, except when average charges are applied as follows. So the average charge: A creditor may charge a consumer the average charge for a settlement service if the following conditions are met. The average charge is no more than the average amount paid for the service by all of the consumers for a class of transactions. The creditor defines a class of transactions based on a period of time, geographic area, and type of loan. The creditor uses the same average charge for every transaction within the class, and the creditor does not use an average charge for any type of insurance or for any charge based on the loan amount or property value. Within timing, the settlement agent must provide a seller with disclosures that relate to the seller's transaction except in a reverse mortgage. The settlement agent must provide the final disclosure no later than the day of consummation. If during the 30-day period following consummation the disclosures become inaccurate, resulting in the seller's disclosures becoming inaccurate, the seller must deliver corrected disclosures within 30 days after receiving the information that established the inaccuracy. The amount imposed on the seller may not exceed the amount actually received by the service provider for the service. The settlement agent must provide to the creditor a copy of the seller's disclosures, and no fee may be imposed on any person for the preparation or delivery of these disclosures. The special information booklets again, within general rules about the final mortgage disclosures. Not sure why it's here because it's an early disclosure, but regardless, creditors must provide a RESPA special information booklet to a consumer who applies for a consumer loan secured by real property. The booklet must be mailed or delivered not later than 3 business days after the application is received, unless the application is denied within 3 business days, 3 days, I should say. In the case of a home equity line of credit, the creditor must provide the consumer with a book when your home is on the line. On any successor booklet issued by the CFPB, the special information booklet does not need to be provided to a consumer in a transaction where the purpose is not the purchase of a 1 to 4 family residential property, including but not limited to refinancing closed-end loans secured by a subordinate lien or reverse mortgages. No changes may be made to the special information booklet except that the CFPB may be substituted for HUD, and in the avoiding disclosure section, a creditor may inform the consumer that they may find assistance at consumerfinance.gov. However, the reference to HUD's website may not be deleted. In the no discrimination section, the creditor may substitute the CFPB for the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and appropriate address substituted, and the cover of the booklets may be in any form. And the last thing that really isn't here is that the bank can put their own name on the on the special information booklet, if I remember correctly. The estimated disclosure requirements for closed-end consumer transactions secured by real property. List of settlement providers. I'm just going to check my time here. The estimated, this is D, the estimated disclosure requirements for closed-end consumer transactions secured by real property. You have a list of settlement providers being provided as with the estimate, I guess. A creditor is deemed to permit the consumer to shop for settlement service providers if the consumer selects the provider subject to reasonable requirements. B, the creditor must identify the settlement service for which the consumer is permitted to shop on the good faith estimate disclosure. And C, if the consumer is permitted to shop for service providers, the creditor must provide the consumer with a written list identifying available providers with at least one for each service required, and stating that the consumer may choose a different provider for that service. This list must be provided at the same time at the early disclosures but separate from them. Should say as the early disclosures but separate from them. Content of disclosures of estimates on mortgage loans as per 1026.37. These disclosures must be made clearly and conspicuously in a form the consumer can keep, and they must be grouped together and separate from everything else, and they may be provided in electronic form in accordance with the e-sign. The title must be loan estimate. Must include the statement save this loan estimate to compare with your closing disclosure. C, the name and address of the creditor making the disclosures. D, the date the disclosures are issued. E, the name and address of the consumer applying for the credit, labeled applicants. F, the property address that will secure the transaction. G, for transactions involving the seller, the contract sale price of the property. For transactions not involving the seller, the value of the property. The term to maturity of the transaction stated in years or months. The consumer's intended use for the credit using one of the following terms: purchase, refinance, construction, or home equity. Where did I just scrolled too far? Oh, okay. A description of the loan product including one of the following terms: adjustable rate, step rate, or fixed rate. K, the description of the loan product must include the loan features using the following terms as applicable: negative AM, interest only, step payment, balloon payment, or seasonal payment. L, the loan features must precede the disclosure of the loan product, and if the loan has more than one feature, the creditor must disclose only the first one. M, the disclosures for an adjustable rate loan or step rate loan must be preceded by the duration of any introductory rate or payment period and the first adjustment period. On the loan type, using the terms conventional, FHA, VA, or other. If other is used, the creditor must provide a brief description of the loan type. O, loan identification number. P, a statement of whether the interest rate is locked for a specific period of time, and if the rate is locked, the date and time when the period ends. The rate lock statement must be accompanied by the statement that the interest rate, point, and lender credits may change unless the rate has been locked, and the date and time at which the estimate closing costs expire. Loan terms, a separate table that contains the following information. That's the loan amount, interest rate, fully indexed if an ARM, principal and interest payment, prepayment penalty. If the answer is yes, then the maximum amount of the penalty that can be imposed and the period during which it can be imposed. Balloon payment, if the answer is yes, the maximum amount of the balloon payment and date. Whether the amounts may be adjusted for after consummation, including the loan amount, interest rate, and the interest rate, and if the loan term will increase, a disclosure of that fact. Furthermore, the periodic payment, including the frequency of the adjustments and dates. R, a separate table of projected payments that includes an itemization of each separate periodic payment or range of payments with an estimate of taxes, insurance, and assessments, and the payments to be made from the escrow accounts. Within the projected payments section, also, if the loan has the following features, then disclosures of separate periodic payments or ranges are required. That's A through D. A periodic principal and interest payments may change. A scheduled balloon payment will occur. The creditor must automatically terminate mortgage insurance. And D, the anniversary of the due date of the initial periodic payment. Only 3 sets of payments may be disclosed on this table, not counting a balloon payment, that is, a final payment, payment changes resulting from the cancellation of mortgage insurance. 4, each separate periodic payment or range disclosed in the table must be itemized as principal and interest. Minimum and maximum payments must be determined using the maximum and minimum rates. Payments for mortgage insurance must be labeled mortgage insurance. Amounts paid into escrow must be labeled escrow. The total payment must be labeled total monthly payment. Subheadings must be used to indicate the number of years during which the payment or range of payments apply, and the final balloon payment must be labeled final payment, and taxes based on the improved property value, insurance, and other assessments must be labeled as such and expressed as a monthly amount with a statement that they may increase over time and that the consumer must pay separately any amounts not paid by the creditor. S, costs at closing. A separate table labeled costs at closing to include 1 through 5, the total closing costs with a statement that it includes all loan costs and lender credits. 2, loan costs. 3, all lender credits. 4, a statement referring the consumer to the tables in the section for more details. And 5, the dollar amount that comprises the cash to close with a statement that it includes the total closing costs and a statement referring the consumer to the tables for details. T, in transactions without a seller, instead of a disclosure of cash to close is calculated in transaction with the seller, the creditor may disclose the amount due to or from the consumer and a statement referring the consumer to an alternative table. And U, a statement that the consumer may obtain information from the CFPB website and a link to the URL. V, closing cost details in a table labeled loan costs that includes all loan costs in the transaction, including an itemization of origination charges, including all amounts the consumer will pay to each creditor and loan originator for originating the loan. Points must be listed separately. The number of items cannot exceed 13. 2, the itemization of services the consumer cannot shop for in the subtotal of each category. Title-related items must begin with the word title, and the total number of items cannot exceed 13. 3, an itemization of the services that the consumer can shop for and a subtotal of each category. The title-related items must begin with the word title. The total number of items cannot exceed 14. 4, the total loan cost consisting of the subtotals of the items preceding it. Points must be listed first. All others must be listed alphabetically. And 5, if the creditor is not able to itemize every service and charge required to be disclosed, the remaining charges must be disclosed in an aggregate amount in the last line of the form labeled as additional charges. W, closing cost details must include all costs associated with the transaction that are in addition to the closing cost details. 1, this table must contain the items and amounts using the 6 subheadings required, and 2, taxes and other government fees must be itemized and subtotaled as follows: recording costs and transfer fees. X, prepaids, costs paid by the consumer in advance of the first scheduled payment, and it must be itemized. 1, on the first line, the number of months of homeowners insurance premiums payable at closing. 2, on the second line, the number of months for which the mortgage insurance premiums will be payable at closing. 3, on the third line, the amount of prepaid interest to be paid per day, the interest rate, and the total dollar amount to be paid by the consumer at closing. And 4, on the fourth line, the number of months for which property taxes are to be paid at consummation along with the total dollar amount. And it just blows your mind, really, that you're going to be required to be accurate on these estimates when it's only 3 days after receiving the application that you're making the estimate. Nevertheless, Y, Z, A, B, B, C, C, all required to be on the loan estimate. Y being initial escrow payment at closing must be itemized, limited to 5 items. 1, on the first line, the number of months accrued and the amount collected at consummation for homeowners insurance. 2, on the second line, the amount escrowed per month and the total to be collected at closing for mortgage insurance premiums. And 3, on the third line, the amount escrowed per month and the number of months and the amount to be collected at closing for property taxes. Z, an itemization of any other amounts that will be collected at closing under the term other, but not exceed 5 items. A, the total of all of the other subtotals must be disclosed. B, the total cost must be itemized and disclosed. It is a sum of the total loan costs and total other costs. C, calculated cash needed to close. The total amount of cash that the consumer must provide at closing must be disclosed with the amount itemized as follows. There's total closing costs, must be a positive number. Closing costs to be financed, which must be a negative number. Down payment and other funds from the borrower, and in parentheses, the difference between the purchase price and the loan amount is disclosed as a positive number. 4, deposit, amounts paid to the seller or held in escrow disclosed as a negative number. 5, funds for borrower, subtracting the principal amount from the total of existing debt being satisfied. If this amount yields a negative number, it is disclosed as a negative number. And seller credits, the amount of closing costs paid by the seller, also displayed as a negative number. 7, adjustments and other credits, closing costs paid by persons other than the buyer, seller, loan originator, creditor, and it's displayed as a negative number. 8, estimated cash to close, the total of all of the above items. D, on the loan estimate is alternative disclosure, cash to close for transactions without a seller. The creditors may provide a separate notice and total amount of cash that must be provided by the consumer at closing as follows. 1, the loan amount. 2, the total of closing costs, which is a negative number. 3, the total of payoffs and payments to third parties, also a negative number. 4, cash to or from the consumer. 5, closing costs to be financed. E, on the loan estimate is the adjustable payment table. If the periodic payments may change but not based on an adjustment to the interest rate, or if the transaction is a seasonal payment product, the creditor must provide a separate table that contains the following information. 1 through 5. 1, whether there are interest-only payments, and if so, when the payments are scheduled. 2, whether the obligation provides for optional payments, and if so, the period during which the consumer can make them. 3, whether there are stop payments, and if so, the period during which the periodic regular periodic payment are scheduled to increase. 4, whether there are seasonal payments, and if so, the period during which periodic payments are not scheduled. And 5, information on principal and interest payments, including the number of the payment that may change, counting from the first payment due, the frequency of subsequent changes to the payments, and the maximum payment that may occur during the loan term. FF, adjustable interest rate table. If the interest rate may increase, a table with the following information. 1 through 6. 1, if the index and margin if the loan is not a step rate. 2, if the product is a step rate transaction, the maximum amount of any adjustments to the interest rate that are scheduled and predetermined. 3, the interest rate at consummation. 4, the minimum and maximum interest rates for the loan after any introductory period expires. 5, the change frequency, including the month with the interest rate the month with the interest rate may first change and the frequency of interest rate adjustments. And lastly, the limits on interest rate changes, including the maximum possible change for the first adjustment and the maximum possible change for subsequent adjustments. GG, additional information about the loan, including the name and NMLS ID number for the creditor and the mortgage broker, the name and NMLS ID of the individual loan officer of the creditor and mortgage broker, and the email address and telephone number of the loan officer. We're now on page 349, and we're still talking about loan estimate disclosures. There's a requirement for a comparison table, and almost the entire page is about it. Good God, and a table